Steven, I didn't sell out, son. I bought in. Keep that in mind.
What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA. And in the world of music, there are few things worse than being labeled as a sellout. We've all heard people use the term, but what does it actually mean? For some people, it means that an artist has thrown their artistic integrity in the trash and compromised on their principles just to make more money. For example, as many people have accused Rage Against the Machine or Green Day of doing.
Rage Against the Machine has become the machine. Yeah. I'm the revolutionary, and Rage Against the Machine is just government rock.
And then there's other people who apply the label of sellout to basically any artist that changes their style into something that's more accessible and reaches a bigger audience. For example, Metallica, AFI, or even Taylor Swift. But is it really as simple as anybody who signs to a major label or makes more accessible music is a sellout? I'm not sure that it is. And I'm not even sure that just conceptually, the idea of selling out even makes sense at all. Because the truth is that every single musician wants success. What I mean is everyone wants to sell as many albums as possible and play the biggest shows that they can, right? Like as soon as you put your music out into the public, that's what you're hoping for. So if all of that is true, what exactly is a sellout? And is there a difference between selling out and buying in? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. And also, I'd like to thank Raycon for sponsoring this video. It's summertime, which means it is time to get out there and enjoy this amazing weather. And personally, I like to do a lot of outdoor running while I listen to my favorite music. And these Raycon earbuds right here are perfect for that. Raycon is disrupting the electronics industry by making great sound for everyone. Their wireless earbuds start at half the price of other premium audio brands. They honestly sound great, and also they fit really nicely in my ears so they don't fall out when I get all sweaty, and they give you up to 8 hours of playtime so you don't have to worry about your earbuds dying in the middle of a run. You can also use their earbud tap controls to toggle between 3 different sound profiles, noise isolation, and awareness modes. And they also have buy now, pay later options, free domestic shipping, and 2 years of product protection for just a few dollars, as well as a 30-day return policy, which is probably why these everyday earbuds have over 50,000 5-star reviews. One thing I really like is the custom gel tips for the most comfortable ear fit. So if you want to check it out, click the link in the description of this video, or go to buyraycon.com/punkrockmba to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. And there are so many meanings to the term selling out that I think the best way for me to go about this is just to kind of go down a list of artists who have been accused of selling out and talk about the dynamics of each one of those. And let me start with Green Day, because as somebody who grew up in the 90s punk and hardcore scene, as you can tell from the flyers behind me, one of the first bands that I remember to be widely hated for allegedly selling out is Green Day. As most of you probably know, their roots are in the Bay Area punk scene of that era. And without question, no matter what anybody tells you, they were a legit punk band, full stop, end of story. And if you don't believe me, look at all the random shows they played at basements and various different shitty DIY venues with bands like Neurosis, Plutocracy, and Filth. And back then, the biggest sin that a punk band could ever commit would be signing to a major label. Because doing that meant you didn't care about the scene or your values, all you cared about was money. So when Green Day signed to Warner Brothers in 1993, it was a huge scandal. They were basically kicked out of the scene for being sellouts and banned from ever playing at 924 Gilman Street, which was the famous punk venue where they got their start. But think about it from their perspective, as the ones signing that contract. Here is what Billy Joe Armstrong said about it. When I signed that major label contract, I was 20 years old. I did it because I wanted to play music for the rest of my life. That's every 20-year-old's dream, to do whatever the hell you want. And considering that Dookie, their first major label album, sounded exactly like their independent albums, just with somewhat better production, did they really sell out? Or did they just do what pretty much anybody would do if they were presented with the same opportunity? I mean, if someone came along to you right now and said, hey, I love what you do, can I offer you $1 million contract to do more of it? Would you say no to that? And if you said yes, do you think that would make you a sellout?
While artists are still making music, that is not how they make their money anymore. Nowadays, if you want to earn a living as a musician, you pretty much have no choice but to sell out.
And so this gets to what I think is one of the most toxic parts of this whole conversation about selling out, which is the unstated belief that in order for art to be valid, the person creating that art has to take some sort of vow of poverty and suffering, which is incredibly toxic to me because essentially it means that artists will feel like in order to please their fans, they have to stay broke and miserable. And I actually love what Henry Rollins had to say about this.
Do you have any idea what some of these bands went through to make that music? The fact that there might be some money for them all these years later is great. You think that paycheck is in any way a slight to their integrity? Are you fucking kidding me? Pay them. Pay them double. Pay them now. It's about fucking time.
And make no mistake, he lived it. After grinding it out on the road with Black Flag in the 80s and playing these just absolutely brutal shows where he would get punched in the face and spit on and like literally attacked by the audience and get paid literally like $25 a night, and in between tours he lived in a shed. He paid his dues. And when he got his chance to get the bag, he did it. He did some admittedly kind of hilarious ads for big brands like The Gap and Apple, as well as some roles in movies like Johnny Mnemonic with Keanu Reeves and later on Sons of Anarchy.
Why is Henry Rollins using my fucking phone?
And most recently, some voice acting in a SpongeBob spinoff. And is all of that a little bit corny? Sure, maybe. I mean, the Gap ad is definitely kind of goofy. But you know what? If they offered that to me, I would say yes in a heartbeat, and I bet you would too. So for anybody who would call him a sellout for doing all that stuff, my question is, what was he supposed to do? Say no and just continue living in a shed for the rest of his life? Is this what you want for the artist that you supposedly love? I mean, this is kind of how it oftentimes ends up being. When the bands are out there on the road grinding and literally struggling to find money for food every day, everyone's on their side, everyone's tweeting about how fucked up the music industry is because it doesn't pay artists. But then as soon as the artists actually get paid, then the fans turn on them. It's almost like the fans are only on your side when you're miserable, which, to put it bluntly, is kind of fucked up.
These bands are not being co-opted or selling out at all. Selling out is when you make the record you're told to make instead of the one you want to make.
But probably the biggest category of artists who are accused of selling out are the ones that change their sound in favor of something more accessible. The biggest example of this that I can remember is Metallica, who have been called sellouts pretty much as long as I can remember for going soft on several different occasions in their career.
When did the sellout bullshit start? When the Black Album came out?
It started
Way before that.
Yeah. Ride the Lightning.
Ride the Lightning.
On the second album, we had a song called Fade to Black that we still play almost at every show, and James thought it would be a great idea to have acoustic guitars on the album. And so when the metal community heard a Metallica song with acoustic guitars, they all lost their fucking lunches.
The same thing happened to AFI when they came out with Sing the Sorrow in 2003 and ventured beyond the sort of gothic melodic hardcore sound that they'd been doing. And of course, more recently, Bring Me the Horizon, especially their 2019 album Amo, which was basically straight up pop.
You need a taste of your own medicine.
And then for doing songs with pop artists like MGK, Ed Sheeran, and Sigrid. But what I find really interesting is that it's not just punk and metal bands who get this criticism. You hear the same thing about even the most mainstream pop artists. For example, Black Eyed Peas. As some people may remember, they started out as kind of like a backpack rap group in the 90s, before adding Fergie to their lineup in 2003, and becoming one of the biggest pop groups of the 2000s. Or as another example that might be surprising to some people, Taylor Swift. Like, it might seem weird to call probably literally the biggest pop artist on the planet a sellout, because how could a pop artist be a sellout? But that was a big narrative around her about 10 years ago, when she shifted from her earlier pop country sound to basically just straight up pop on her album 1989. And she was always more on the pop side of country, but this shift was considered to be a huge blow to the country scene because she was their biggest crossover star since Garth Brooks in the 90s. And a lot of country fans took her quote unquote leaving country as almost this like personal betrayal. And I could keep going on forever. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds of artists who have faced similar criticism over the years. Essentially, any time an artist's music becomes more pop or more accessible, there's a segment of people who will instantly say that they sold out. And as you can probably tell, I've always found this narrative to be kind of annoying, and here's why. First of all, I think there's an assumption here that if an artist starts playing music that's more accessible, the only reason they're doing that is because they want more money and fame. It couldn't possibly be because that's just what they actually want to do. And And I'm sure that is sometimes the case, although obviously none of us can really know what's going on in anyone else's head. But why is it so hard for people to believe that as an artist grows and matures, maybe they just want to do something different? In the case of Bring Me the Horizon, for example, should we just expect them to play deathcore for their entire career because that's what they did on their first EP? Right? That makes no sense to me. Or take the example of Phil Collins' old band Genesis, who started out playing weird progressive rock in the 70s like this, before turning into just a straight up pop band in the 80s. And I think for a lot of artists like them, it's not about selling out at all, it's about new creative challenges. Because they prove to themselves and the world in general that they can write these big, sprawling, complex songs with these super elaborate arrangements that are 7 or 8 minutes long. They already checked that box. And writing tight, focused pop songs is something that is actually equally challenging, just in a different way. I know a lot of metal fans in particular don't want to hear that, but it's true. Writing super catchy pop hooks like Genesis did in the 80s is hard as hell. And if you don't believe me, try it.
So it's like I'm just sitting here waiting for that magic to hit, whenever it is. And I'm sitting here in life waiting for it to hit. And I'm not going to press it, because when you press it, you make dog shit.
And what it comes down to is that I think any great artist is going to get tired of doing the same things over and over and over. So I think for a lot of people, it's not about selling out in pursuit of more fame and money, or their label pressuring them into doing something more commercial that they don't really want to do. I think more often than not, it's just about them wanting to try something new. But let's just say that's not the case. For the sake of argument, let's say that they did decide to write more accessible music specifically because they wanted to reach a bigger audience. My question is there something wrong with that? Is there a reason why a musician or any artist of any kind should intentionally limit their audience? I actually really like how Mark McGrath of Sugar Ray put it. Once you sell a few million records, you're like, how do I become Aerosmith? None of us stopped at a few hits and said, all right, that's enough. We all swung for the fences. Some of us didn't do it, but my God, we had a hell of a career. And side note, he makes a pretty good point that if you've ever called Sugar Ray sellouts, that also means that at some point you thought Sugar Ray was a credible punk band. Well played, Mark. But that really gets to the truth of this whole selling out conversation to me. All musicians want fame or money to some extent. Every one of them. Because if they didn't want those things, they wouldn't release their music out into the world. They would just play it for themselves in their bedroom. So in a lot of ways, I think the only difference between sellouts and everybody else is how successful they were. With that being said, I think that there is sometimes an inherent tension between an artist's natural sensibilities and what they would like to do, and what's actually marketable. And sometimes you can very visibly tell that they're trying to pivot to something that is more marketable. For example, in the early 90s, when Dr. Dre completely transformed hip-hop almost overnight by making gangster rap popular, you saw a lot of the older artists scrambling to adapt. For example, MC Hammer quickly threw together a gangster album, and it really just did not come across as authentic. Which is kind of ironic if you know about MC Hammer's actual backstory, but that's another conversation.
Give me the girls with the pumps and a buck. Pumps and a buck. Now many say a big bus, but if you know that it's a phone truck.
Or when all the hair metal bands reacted to Nirvana by trying to do a grunge album. And you could say that this is selling out, I guess, but at the same time, I get it. The trends had clearly changed, and is it so wrong for an artist to try to adapt and learn from the new generation of artists that are coming up? Like, I don't think that either of those songs are good at all, but I do respect that they were trying something new and different and trying to stay current, even if what they did wasn't actually great. At least they tried to evolve, and I respect that. And this illustrates a really tricky spot that a lot of artists find themselves in. On the one hand, if they change, then they're labeled as bandwagon jumpers who are selling out and chasing the trends. But then on the other hand, if they don't change, well then people laugh and say they're washed up. So what are they supposed to do?
You think I'm a sellout. Why? Because I live in a big house or I dress a certain way? You said we need to stick together, but you don't even know what that means. If you ask me, you're the real sellout.
And there's another category of artists who are oftentimes labeled as sellouts, which is bands that over time eventually became just a solo act. For example, Maroon 5, who started out as actually a pretty good rock band back in the early 2000s.
When it gets cold outside, I got nobody to love.
before eventually turning into, basically the Adam Levine solo show. The same thing happened with Panic at the Disco, which started out as a full band and then eventually became Brendan Urie with a piano. And there are other examples like No Doubt and Paramore, which maybe didn't go quite that far, but in both cases, over time, there was clearly more focus on Gwen and Haley than the rest of the band. And whenever that happens, it's usually followed by people calling them sellouts that took a formerly great band and turned them into a solo pop act, which honestly isn't wrong. That is kind of what happens. But my question is, was there ever any other possible outcome than that? You take someone like Gwen Stefani or Brendan Urie or Hayley Williams, and of course they're going to get all the attention. That's just who they are. They're incredible performers with just massive charisma. It's honestly kind of unrealistic and foolish to think that the guitarist or the drummer was ever going to get an equal share of the spotlight. And I get it. It's definitely not fair, and I can certainly understand why that might rub some people the wrong way. But I'm not sure it's a sign that they sold out. I think it's just the natural evolution of things when you have somebody in the band with that kind of outsized star power. Of course they're going to outshine everyone else. They can't help it. And also, is that such a bad thing? There's oftentimes this kind of narrative that the other members of the band are unhappy when the frontman or woman starts getting a lot of attention, which sometimes is true, for example, with No Doubt. But we shouldn't assume that that's always the case. For example, if you're the drummer of Maroon 5, maybe you don't even want to be a star. Maybe you just want to play drums every night and make millions of dollars a year for it without getting mobbed at the grocery store. Not everyone wants to be the center of attention, and that is totally okay. And by now you may be asking yourself, okay guy, I get it, but is there anything that you do think is actually selling out? Or are you just so all about money that you don't have a problem with any of this? Well, one recent example that I do think is kind of weird is a K-pop group called New Jeans, whose latest song is called Zero and is literally sponsored by Coca-Cola. As in Coke Zero, like the logo is at the beginning of the video. They've got the Coke red everywhere in it. And the chorus in Korean is Coca-Cola is tasty.
Coca-Cola 맛있다. Coca-Cola 맛있다.
And granted, K-pop has never really presented itself as anything other than like just a purely commercial product, so I guess there's nothing really wrong with this. But to me, it is a little bit too just blatantly transactional. Like if you remember the Josie and the Pussycats movie from the early 2000s, with all the insanely over-the-top Target product placement, the New Jeans song is kind of like that, except, well, not a joke.
Wyatt? Yes. Could you maybe talk to Marco about him always doing my face? You remember in the what video I established the face?
And of course, we have to talk about Kiss, especially all the just super crass, blatantly commercial merch like the Kiss casket. I do have to respect Gene Simmons' just absolutely shameless hustle, but that level of crass commercialism is a bit much even for me. And honestly, I'd have to say Rage Against the Machine as well. I do think they're a great band and there's a lot of parts of their message that I really like and respect, but for as much as they spoke out against the power of big money and corporate interests, over the last 30 years, they've really done nothing but continue to align themselves with major labels, Ticketmaster, and the music industry establishment at pretty much every opportunity. And I get the argument that their message will reach more people by working inside the system and using that to amplify it. And I do think there's a lot of validity to that. But at a certain point, you have to ask, how is selling a $1,700 signature guitar when you're already a multimillionaire? How is that raging against the machine? So just to bring it all home, to me, the big point here is that I think the whole conversation about selling out is honestly kind of pointless and toxic. At the heart of all of this is the belief that somehow art is only valid if the person making it is poor and miserable, which, to put it bluntly, I just completely reject that whole idea. I think it's incredibly limiting and unhealthy, and I think the sooner we can just completely get rid of that, the better. Yes, there are certainly times where artists do something that I personally find to be a little bit over the line in terms of blatant commercialism, like the K-pop group who did the Coke Zero song, but honestly, who am I to tell anyone else what to do with their career? So I say, if a musician wants to get their bag, let them.
What would you rather hear? Iggy and the Teddy Bears doing I'm a Punk Rocker in a car ad, or enduring some generic background music? I thought so.
All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my videos and podcasts early. There are members-only VIP channels on my Discord. I do giveaways, and there's also a way to have me review your music. So if any of that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.